On Saturday morning, after Greg and I had completed our morning walks, we took advantage of a bridge opening to scamper out of Great Bridge and into the Albemarle Chesapeake Canal. By pure dumb luck, we arrived at the Centerville Turnpike Bridge just in time for an opening, but we had to wait a while for the opening at the North Landing Bridge. Most of the scenery was just mile after mile of marshland, with the occasional guest appearance of a large, blunt object. Once we got south of Pungo Ferry, the landscape opened up a bit in North Landing River. Later in the afternoon, we once again found ourselves in tighter quarters as we squeezed through the North Carolina Cut, passing Coin Jock along the way. Coin Jock is the only marina I am aware of along this section of the waterway. Our first two attempts at anchoring for the night were a bust. In both cases, there was not enough water depth to move a reasonable distance away from the main channel. Greg and I finally found what we were looking for, where the North River starts to transition into Albemarle Sound. This particular spot, between marker 159 and 161, would not be suitable in a southerly blow, but it worked just fine for us that night. After breakfast Sunday morning, we got the anchor up and headed out. Elizabeth City is located 15 miles up the Pasquotank River, which is quite a distance when you're only going 7.5 knots. It was becoming increasingly obvious to me why the Dismal Swamp option is so popular with boaters traveling between Elizabeth City and Norfolk. When we finally arrived in Elizabeth City, we grabbed one of the free slips that the city makes available to transient boaters. You are limited to a 48-hour stay in these slips, and there is no electrical hookup. There are restrooms and showers in a nearby building, but you will have to pay a fee for the combination code necessary to use the showers. You could obtain the shower combination at either an adjacent office or down the street at the museum, but both locations are only going to be open during their regular office hours. Taking advantage of these free slips turned out to be a mistake. The problem was the southeast winds we experienced during our stay. A smarter option would have been to pass through the drawbridge and take advantage of either of the two free docks indicated on the Active Captain website. Both of these docks would have been located in water that was much more protected from the southeast wind. Elizabeth City is a nice town to wander around in. The town has been around for a long time, as you will quickly find out if you walk through the cemetery downtown. The heart of the downtown area seems to be experiencing hard times as shopkeepers have fled to the suburbs, but Greg and I still enjoyed wandering around the area. A Lowe's home improvement store and a Food Lion grocery store are located roughly 1.5 miles down the road. Closer to the waterfront, you will find a nice park, a museum, and the Groupers Waterfront Restaurant, where Greg treated me to dinner. On Monday morning, the southeast wind was starting to kick up a little as Greg and I prepared to free Slow Bells from her overnight bondage. As the wind increased, the water in front of the bulkhead started to look more and more like a washing machine. It was to be another exciting departure for anyone watching us from shore, and I nearly put my boat on the tiki deck of the Grouper restaurant before we managed to return to the relative safety of deeper water. Crab pot buoys are a pretty regular annoyance to pleasure boaters in this area, The line running between the buoy above and the crab pot below can get tangled in the propeller and disable the engine. On a nice day like you see here, the crab pot buoys are relatively easy to spot. But on the Monday morning we left Elizabeth City, waves and reflected sunlight made the crab pot buoys difficult to see. Gregg was better at spotting them than I was. The weather was forecast to deteriorate the next day, so we needed a good place to hide. My marina neighbor, Mike, had suggested we check out East Lake in the southeast corner of Albemarle Sound, near the mouth of the Alligator River. So that's where we headed. The wind and waves were on our beam as we bounced across Albemarle Sound. My boat was rolling as much as 20 degrees upwind and 30 degrees downwind. I first tried anchoring in South Lake, which was a little closer, but a short time after we had finished anchoring, I concluded that it was just about the dumbest place in Albemarle Sound to anchor in a southeasterly blow, with the possible exception of the Elizabeth City bulkhead. Eventually, I had to admit my mistake and pull up the anchor. We motored over to check out East Lake, as my neighbor Mike had initially recommended. We ended up anchoring in a great spot near Long Point, which had good water depth and good protection from the forecast winds. We were joined later in the evening by another trawler who anchored further from shore. The next day, Tuesday, we spent all day at anchor. After pancakes and Jimmy Dean sausage for breakfast, we spent the day doing boat chores, surfing the web, reading, and watching the rain. We had a beautiful day on Wednesday for the 37-mile cruise to the little town of Columbia. I had to skip my morning walk, but fortunately the windlass refused to work that morning, so I was able to get some exercise pulling in the anchor chain by hand. In hindsight, I think the only problem with the windlass was that the captain only turned on one of the two circuit breakers that the windlass required. During our cruise, Gregg and I got bored and decided to try to imitate one of the scenes from the movie Titanic. This chart covers the area we traveled on Wednesday. It comes from a navigational program on my laptop called PolarView. We decided to go around this restricted area, although I don't know if that was really necessary. The only point where the water depth got uncomfortably shallow was right at the mouth of the Scuppermong River. Water depths elsewhere were pretty standard, and the water depth at the town of Columbia was outrageously deep. The city dock in Columbia is another one of those places where you can stay for free for 48 hours. I paid $3 extra for 50-amp electrical service. There was water available at the dock and a restroom with a shower in a little building adjacent to the dock. There was room for one large yacht to be tied to the side of the bulkhead and several slips perpendicular to the bulkhead. I asked if tidal current created a problem for boats getting into and out of those slips, but I was told it was not an issue. Since we were the only boat there at the time, we did a side tie parallel to the bulkhead. 3 people met us at the dock in Columbia. 2 of them were city employees in normal casual dress who helped us tie up. A third gentleman, who was dressed in a suit, turned out to be the mayor of Columbia. It was not only the first time I had been welcomed by the mayor of a town, but also the first time I had ever even met the mayor of a town. Everyone was very friendly and very helpful. Gregg and I walked over to the laundromat and did a week's worth of laundry. I took a quick tour of the little town and especially enjoyed my visit to the little hardware store. For dinner, Gregg treated me to a great meal at a Mexican restaurant just a short distance from the boat. Gregg was so impressed with the food, he ended up buying a little more for lunch the following day. Then it was back to the boat for reading and bedtime. On Thursday morning, Gregg and I both checked out a local nature trail, which conveniently starts just down the boardwalk from the marina on the south side of the Highway 64 bridge. After I finished with the nature trail, I took one more pass through town before returning to the boat for breakfast. I decided to skip the town of Plymouth, which is one of the many stops on the Albemarle Loop. The water depths looked a little too questionable to me. However, it's difficult to get a good feel for a narrow waterway just by looking at a chart. I hear Plymouth has beautiful new docks and some interesting Civil War history, so maybe we should have tried to sneak in there on a rising tide. Sailors should be aware of the fact that they will have to fit under a 50-foot high bridge in order to reach Plymouth. Once we left Columbia, we set a course for the town of Edenton, roughly 25 miles away. It was another picture-perfect April day. The harbor in Edenton is inside a breakwater. There are good water depths all the way into the marina. Like other marinas on the Albemarle Loop, the first couple nights at the marina were free, although they did charge a fee for electrical hookup. The bathroom and shower weren't all that great, but it seemed to me a small price to pay for such a nice moorage in such an interesting town. Gregg and I took a quick tour of the downtown area, then Gregg treated me to dinner at the Waterman's Grill, where I had an unhealthy but very tasty meal of fish and chips. Gregg and I took a vacation from our vacation on Friday and spent the day exploring Edenton. I think Edenton has the healthiest downtown area of just about any small town I have ever visited. Even the downtown Sears store was alive and well. There are lots of places to eat and shop, but the coolest thing about Edenton is the old houses and buildings, some of them going back to the Revolutionary War era, although I noticed that a few of them had been moved from their original location. Edenton is the oldest permanent settlement in North Carolina. Its early claim to fame was as a seaport, although much of that industry later shifted to Elizabeth City when they finished building the Dismal Swamp Canal. In addition to simply wandering around town snapping pictures, Gregg and I also took a 1-hour trolley tour that I enjoyed.